Welcome, folks. Letting some people join. When I hit the start button, sometimes it takes a little bit for people to get pulled away from that waiting room out of the ether into like the actual session. But we'll get started because we do only have an hour today. My name is Tyler Colburn. I am the professional development consultant here with the Nova Scotia College of Social Workers, and you're joining today for our introduction session on gender-based violence and social work. We're joining with Christina Fifield. And she's here to lead us through this session. And I want to just remind folks that this session is also meant to support those who are coming to our in-person conference on November 24th. That's going to be a deeper dive into the role of social workers in transforming and addressing and preventing gender-based violence and intimate partner violence in Nova Scotia. So this is an introductory section that's going to go over some of the core concepts and themes and ideas of, gender-based violence and the work that Christina has done over 17 years, and lots of the wisdom and insight and expertise that comes from survivors, people with lived experience, and people who are doing this work in community. Before we get started, I want to begin with a land acknowledgement, and I'm also going to put some links here in the chat so that you folks can also join us in this land acknowledgement. So you're invited to join in the land acknowledgement, share your names and pronouns, the land that you're on. You can use the placenames.mapdev.ca link there to look up the land that you're on. And how are you arriving? Share maybe what you're curious about today. I want to begin by acknowledging that I'm speaking from Guawagayach, which is the Mi'kmaq name for Big Pine Hill or Citadel Hill here in Halifax, which is located on the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq. The inherent rights of the Mi'kmaq were recognized in the peace and friendship treaties signed with the Mi'kmaq, Maliseet, and Passamaquoddy peoples from 1725 to 1779. This series of treaties did not surrender Indigenous land, resources, or sovereignty to the British Empire, but instead established rules for an ongoing relationship between nations. Canada later reaffirmed the treaties in Section 35 of the Constitution Act of 1982, and they remain active to this day. And so I invite you folks to take some time to pause from reflection and gratitude for the land where we live and where we work. Would love to see people engage in the chat or the Q&A today as well. And so please, share where you're arriving from, where you're calling in from, how you're arriving, how you're feeling as we start the session today. So as we begin to acknowledge the land, there's also an invitation for you and for us to consider the ways that we are also expressions of nature. And so this image here on the right shows a tree stump and a fingerprint, and it just sort of hopefully draws to mind the idea that we are entangled with nature. And I love this quote from Gesturing Towards Decolonial Futures that says, "Understand that the earth is not an extension of our bodies, it's the other way around." So as we acknowledge the land, you and we collectively are invited to also pause in gratitude for all who have and continue to heroically care and advocate for this beautiful land. May we join them in this sacred work. I'm thinking of land defenders and water protectors engaged in resistance and resurgence here in Mi'kmaq, across Turtle Island, and throughout the world. Specifically, I'm thinking a lot about lately Hunter's Mountain. And the folks who are engaged in resistance up in Unama'ki currently in this moment, but also the people across Turtle Island, whether it's Wet'suwet'en or other places where people are actively resisting settler colonialism. And you are also invited to ground yourselves in the wisdom of the land-based Mi'kmaq teachings and values we must all begin to learn. Invited to also decolonize ourselves, our practice in this community that we share by working for justice for all living beings as an expression of our gratitude for being here. Invited to recenter ourselves away from the violent ways colonization fills our world and fills us, and then also invited to work on letting go of the unconscious bias that is everywhere inside and out. And for us, Christine and I have been talking about this land acknowledgement and decolonization, and really thinking about the ways that settler colonialism and white supremacy have created the conditions and sustained the conditions and the systems and the forces that contribute to the violence against the land, women, girls, and gender diverse folks, and how entangled these forces are. And of course, we're all treaty people. And so as we think about treaties and treaty rights and treaty accountability, specifically if you're a settler like myself, how does this impact what we do and how we do it? How will it guide our work together today and going forward? And for us at the college, of course, it's really important that we uphold our commitments to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action and specific to regulatory bodies. And so for us, as we offer PD, we're committed to learning, but even more so committed to unlearning. Separate and distinct from a land acknowledgement is our commitment for reparations of people of African descent. In the chat, I did post our commitment to decolonization and reparations, so you can take a look at those if you're curious. But for us, as we think about reparations for people of African descent, we know it's not just a moral obligation, it's also a material obligation. And so it's about aligning resources and practices and programs to support reparations for people of African descent. For us, that looks like restitution, compensation, rehabilitation, satisfaction, and then guarantees of non-repetition. And as we hold on to this awareness of reparations and our commitment, we're really thinking specifically about the distinct African Nova Scotian communities, the 52 of them that are existing across this province, and the folks who have ancestry and connections to the Black Loyalists, the Maroons, the Southern American Black refugees, and how the legacies of these communities have shaped not just Nova Scotia's cultural landscape, but political and economic landscape as well. So, thanks folks for checking in. I love seeing that in the chat. Really appreciate it. So our objectives for today, we're really hoping that you shift and develop some knowledge, skills, and values around the concepts and ideas, the power dynamics related to gender-based and intimate partner violence. We're also, really grounding this in our code of ethics, which is new for 2026. So for social workers on the call, you'll have to attest that you've read and understand these code of ethics when you do your renewals for this year. And really, we're looking at value 1, respecting the dignity and worth of all people. Value 2, promoting social justice. And I think the most important for social workers in this context is providing culturally responsive, confident professional services. We know that gender-based violence is an epidemic in this province and across Turtle Island and around the world. We know that extremism and violence is increasing. And so I want you to think critically about the roles that social workers have in the prevention and the advocacy and the delivery of services that are in support of ending this epidemic. Reminder as well for social workers on the call, this is part of our formal professional development. You're also allowed to put it towards the mandated topic of social justice. So as you're doing renewals for this year, please make sure you track this as an activity for your PD renewals. So today, we're going to be doing some intro, welcome, and framing. We're going to have sort of a grounding and overview of gender-based violence, intimate partner violence, those key concepts and terms. Also talk a lot about what is the work that's been accomplished so far in the province, and then really take a critical look at the failures in the systems that have brought us to this current place. Want to talk about how GBV connects to social work practice, take an anti-oppressive and critical lens, and encourage some calls to action, and then a bit of a summary and a wrap up for the session today. Before I pass it back over to Christina, I just wanted to offer some framing. If you've been on calls before, you might have seen this, but want you to hopefully engage with the session today however you want to engage, whether it's more passive or you want to be more active. You're welcome to use the chat or the Q&A if you have curiosities or questions you want to share. But want to challenge this idea that this session might, 100% line up with your expectations. For many of us, it takes a bit of time to process or to think or reflect. And so maybe your insights will come later, but hopefully you'll get some insights here today as well. So your engagement with this session may not have immediate and/or practical applications for you, and that's okay. You don't have to agree with anything presented or shared, but we ask that you be open to seeing what happens. Really want to honor and, just remind folks on this call that we have survivors with us, survivors of gender-based violence, survivors of intimate partner violence. And we all are carrying our own unique lenses and worldviews into the session. So the content that Christina is sharing or the things that I might share are specifically unique to us, and you might have your own understanding. So just inviting curiosity. Invite you to take responsibility for yourself by observing and learning from your conscious and unconscious responses. We're going to be talking about some heavy topics today, and so that might bring up feelings or emotions or experiences for you. And so hopefully you can be in the space to be curious about those things. It's up to you to decide how much you want to share and participate. So you can use the chat, you can use the Q&A, and you're also invited to just take a passive stance today if you want to consume the content and just learn from Christina. And then finally, we can all engage in ways that support others. So I often say that this is not a space for healing, but healing can happen here. And how we show up for and with each other's matters. So as you engage in the chat and the Q&A, I invite you to show up relationally. With that, I am going to pass it over to Christina.
Thank you so much, Tyler. And I'm so honored to be here today. Thank you for everyone who's joining. Before I get started and diving into, this journey we're on in learning and on learning, I just want to, I always start whenever I have an opportunity in acknowledging and sharing gratitude for the survivors I've had the privilege and honor of working with over the last 17 years. My entire career as a social worker has been in the area of gender-based violence, intimate partner violence, and sexualized violence. And through all of my education, degrees, and specialized training, what I really take away and learn is from the lived experiences survivors share with me. And they have so much wisdom and gifts and knowledge, I believe, that is often overlooked, not heard, because they're not in spaces where individuals that have the power towards systemic change, those spaces have not been co-created. So I just again sharing gratitude for everyone who's been a part of that. I've had an opportunity to be a part of their journey, and how you have informed through the knowledge and your wisdom and gifts this presentation and really all of the work I do. And Tyler, next slide. So my name is Christina. I use pronouns she, her. A bit about myself. I started this work back in 2008 when I started my BSW at Dalhousie University. And from that time, I really had an interest in gender-based violence work. From my BSW, I started working at Bryony House. I spent over a decade there working the front lines of gender-based violence work, intimate partner violence, and that experience, the knowledge and wisdom that I learned from working very closely with survivors and from colleagues has really helped informed and really has transformed my work even as a therapist, and the lessons I learned in those experiences doing frontline gender-based violence work. I can't speak enough about the amount of work that goes into co-creating those spaces, the importance of that work. After about 11 years of doing frontline work, I had a keen interest in trauma based on what I was seeing in my work with survivors, which what prompted me to go back and to do my master's and to really start leaning into trauma specialized care. And since my master's, have been really leaning into trauma care, working with survivors and families impacted by gender-based violence. One part of my work that is deeply, deeply important to me is embodied activism around gender-based violence and intimate partner violence. I have a lot of privileges as a white-bodied settler and therapist, and I try to use my power and my privileges to work towards systemic change. So, I'll just say that it has not been an easy road around really trying to get people on board, even from a therapeutic standpoint, around the importance of activism, gender-based violence advocacy as a therapist. And I'll talk more about that as I go through today. But it's really important that because of the systemic injustices, the institutional betrayal that folks experience, that activism is a part of that work. And just about me, I'm most grounded, most connected being in nature. I grew up in Cape Breton. Cape Breton is my favorite place to be when I'm not in the city working or home, in my home in Southwest Cove. So I live rurally currently. And I enjoy anything outside and enjoy anything to do with the ocean. And as you can see, they're not my dogs, but they're my neighbor's dogs in the picture. Stand-up paddleboarding. When they were both little dogs, they both could get on the paddleboard with me, but Now they can't. I can only take one at a time, so they have had to learn to take turns. The ocean, being on the land, connected in nature, is definitely restorative practices that I try to include on a daily and weekly basis and continuing to be able to do this work. Next slide. I'm going to take this opportunity, and I try to model this in any space that I'm in, is the importance of trying to bring presence, trying to do some sort of grounding, mindfulness, intentional practice before we dive into this work. This work, conversations around gender-based violence, intimate partner violence, can be deeply uncomfortable for folks. Inviting you to do what's best for your body. You know your body best. So if you need to step away, you need to leave the call, please do, and honor what your body needs in this moment. So if you're curious, you're invited to come home to your body right now in whatever way feels right for you in this moment. Perhaps that means gently noticing where your body meets the ground or the chair beneath you, maybe by placing both feet on the floor, or you may just simply notice your breath. You may choose to bring a hand or both hands to your chest, or maybe bringing your hands to your upper legs or anywhere else that feels supportive and grounding. You have choices. You're invited to take a moment, if you wish, to acknowledge yourself for showing up, for choosing to be here in a way that serves you today. Today, I want to honor the courage and compassion that brought you to this moment. In our roles as social workers, community leaders, and on this journey, it takes deep courage and compassion for both ourselves and others, and to be present with gender-based violence work. It takes courage to turn towards what is difficult, towards suffering and pain and the realities of violence that we are witnessing in the world. Violence towards communities and groups, towards individuals, and towards the land. The easier thing would be to turn away. Yet you are here, possibly turning towards learning, possibly towards systemic change, and holding space for both your own pain and the pain of others. That willingness to witness and to act is an act of courage and also profound compassion. And you're invited right now to just take a moment, maybe a moment of rest, and connecting with your body in whatever feels right in this moment. And thank you for being curious to practice with me today. And Tyler, I'll get you to move to the next slide. All right. So one thing I'll mention, over the last few years, I've learned about the practice of ahisma, and it's the practicing of nonviolence towards yourself and others. And I just want to name that in our work with survivors, in our work that we are doing, that nonviolence and non-harming is so important. And it is a foundational principle of yoga philosophy, but it also offers a moral framework of how we relate to others, ourselves, and the land. Oftentimes it's interpreted as nonviolence in action, but it extends beyond physical harm to encompass our thoughts, our words, and our attitudes. And this practice involves cultivating compassion, kindness, and patience, and not only towards others, but towards ourselves and all living things. And if you're not aware of ahisma, not in the practice of non-harming and non-violence in the relationship you have with yourself, or with others or the land. This is an invitation, maybe if you're curious, to learn more about this practice and what it means in regards to social work practice and how it might be really important in our work around the work that is ahead around gender-based violence. Go ahead there, Tyler. So as Tyler said, we have an epidemic of gender-based violence in Nova Scotia and Canada and globally. And this normalization of violence takes place in all parts of society. So it's seen in communities, within institutions, and it's so interconnected with cultural beliefs, myths, attitudes, biases, and values that treat gender-based violence as a normal part of relationships. This normalization both increases the rates of intimate partner violence and gender-based violence and decreases the ability to recognize and respond to that violence. This is why it is very difficult at times because of the normalization of violence for survivors to reach out for help. And for some folks, because of their early experiences with trauma and violence, it can be very hard to recognize that they're in an intimate partner violent relationship or experiencing a form of gender-based violence. When violence is normalized, those who experience or witness it may not question it or may remain silent about it. And in many cases, the normalization of violence intensifies by harmful stereotypes and victim blaming. And I just want to, name here that why is violence so normalized, especially when we look at violence directed towards women, girls, and gender diverse individuals? It's important here to really acknowledge the patriarchy, misogyny, sexism that is taking place across all parts of society and institutions. And I could talk a lot more about that, but I just need to name that there and why violence and gender-based violence is so normalized. And go ahead there, Tyler. And important to note here, acknowledging intersectionality in gender-based violence work. Gender-based violence, intimate partner violence, when we look at it through an intersectional lens, disproportionately impacts marginalized folks, Indigenous women and girls, African Nova Scotian, people of color, other individuals of culture and groups. We also need to be aware and acknowledge that people living with disabilities, it is highly correlated and intersects with high rates of intimate partner violence and gender-based violence and other forms of diversity when we're looking at also older women and individuals and their experiences with violence, and also our youth, young girls, young women, gender diverse individuals, really all individuals are experiencing different forms of violence and exposed to it, but women and gender diverse individuals are disproportionately impacted when we're looking at rates of intimate partner violence and gender-based violence. And I just want to also name too that in my work, especially since going into private practice over the past, almost 2 years now, is that it's definitely underreported as well, the violence, especially men and boys that have experienced early experience of sexualized violence, other forms of gendered violence. And I don't think, based on what I see in my work with survivors, including men, that we have great statistics on those rates of violence and how it also impacts boys and men as well. And you can go ahead there, Tyler. So I'm going to try to bring, and again, with the time, some knowledge to this conversation about the importance in our work when we're working with survivors of intimate partner violence and gender-based violence, is that these are relational traumas. And the impact of trauma and an individual's lived experience with it can take them away from themselves and others in more ways than one. And I think that based on what I know and what I see in my work with individuals that have experienced violence, is that because of victim blaming, because of these are relational traumas that people are experiencing, that dissociation is very connected with survivors' experiences. And that is a trauma response in an individual and their nervous system going into protecting themselves. So when we look at what is happening across our criminal justice system, when we look at and hear the experiences of individuals that have reached out to service providers, they are often pathologized by systems and supports, and they're often met with individuals not acknowledging or understanding trauma. And I think it's important that if you're doing any work with survivors of gender-based violence, and this is one thing that I'll say when I started this work years ago, and the information and knowledge I have now around the pieces of work through training and through lived experience in working with survivors, is that individuals that are doing any work with survivors and families really should have some basic and solid understanding of trauma theory and attachment-based theory, because it's really important in our work with survivors. And when we're able to look at and understand how trauma impacts the body, how it impacts the brain and people's experiences, I think that maybe um, survivors would not be pathologized and experiencing the rates of victim blaming that they're currently experiencing. And go ahead there, Tyler. Okay. How you show up and how your body shows up matters. And I can't stress this enough. Um, how we care for our bodies, how we show up in practice, whether we're working in a transition house, in a shelter, if we're working in a community-based setting, if we're a therapist in private practice, if we're working in a hospital setting, if we're involved in policy work and we're working with survivors and learning about their experiences, our bodies and how we show up matters. And part of this work, and as I continue to do this work, is really reflecting back on my career and my early experiences, is that one thing I think there's a huge opportunity for in doing this work is how organizations, how we as individuals care for our bodies and the collective care. And survivors of gender-based violence and intimate partner violence, when they're meeting folks for the first time or having experiences, they're hyper aware of our bodies, how we're showing up. The most important thing in my work and what I've learned over the years is that individuals that have experienced so many injustices, different forms of violence, not having choices because of the violence and control and the abuse of power and coercion, really need a safe enough body to hold space, to be present with them. So, how we care for ourselves and how we care for our bodies, I believe, is one of the most important things that we need to do if we're going to be doing gender-based violence work. And I don't think we have that conversation enough in the work. And I think and in hearing lived experiences and feedback from clients over the years, is they share that is one of the most important things to them, is having a safe enough body to hold space, to not become defensive, to not pathologize them, to acknowledge them. And that's why caring for our bodies matter. Go ahead there, Tyler. This quote I learned about when I first started doing this work, and it keeps coming up in so many different spaces and places I'm in. And I think it's so important. No intervention that takes power away from the survivor can possibly foster her recovery, no matter how much it appears to be in her immediate best interest. This quote's by Judith Herman. Judith Herman. Judith has done a tremendous amount of work throughout her career around trauma and working with survivors of gender-based violence. And when this quote was shared by Judith, I just want to note here the importance of gender inclusive language in our work with survivors. This quote was taken from many years ago in Judith's work. But again, no intervention that takes power away from any survivor can possibly foster their recovery, no matter how much it appears to be in their immediate best interest. This is so important because, again, in our work with survivors that oftentimes are coming to us and they have, because of violence and abuse, um, they have had very little choices. They were disempowered. They were controlled. It is so important that regardless of our attachments to outcomes for survivors, that we are honoring choice and not taking power away from any survivor that we're working with. And we're going to talk more about that at the training coming up in November, and you'll hear from survivors about their experiences with interventions, services in the nonprofit sector, in the mental health system, in the public system, in the private system, even with therapy, where clinical interventions or any intervention was taking power away from the individual, and how that was experienced for them, how that landed, and how that really further isolated them so that those individuals away from services and supports. Go ahead there, Tyler. So quickly, just terminology, intimate partner violence is more specific than gender-based violence, and it's sometimes used interchangeably with domestic violence. But intimate partner violence is different in that it applies specifically to intimate relationships, whether or not partners are legal spouse or currently living together, to include all types of intimate relationships, couples, serious or casual, inclusive or non-inclusive, short-term or long-term. Domestic violence is different in the fact that it can happen from other family members, but not from this is where it makes intimate partner violence different. It's coming from a partner. Gender-based violence includes intimate partner violence. It includes domestic violence. Gender-based violence includes sexualized violence, other forms of gendered violence happening. It includes sexual exploitation, maybe sexual harassment that's taking place in workplaces and institutions. So you'll often hear me use the word gender-based violence because it's more inclusive of all the different forms of intimate partner violence. And you can go ahead, sorry there, Tyler, just stay there for a second. And when we're looking at intimate partner violence, it includes all forms of violence. There's a myth, and I will talk more about this in November. There is a myth that, and still in society and still within the work I do with survivors, they'll come in for the first time or in the initial conversations with me and believe, based on what they have been socialized to, their experiences, and what they have learned about intimate partner violence, that it only includes physical violence, and that is not true. Intimate partner violence is defined as behaviors of an intimate partner or ex-partner that causes physical, sexual, or psychological harm, including physical aggression, sexual coercion, psychological abuse, and controlling behaviors, including coercive control. Go ahead there, Tyler. And coercive control, for folks that are on this call, you might be hearing a lot about this. It has come up a lot with what has taken place in Portapique during the mass casualty events. There's being work done across Canada, conversations around coercive control and potentially criminalizing coercive control. This piece of work, this type of violence is often missed, not understood by service providers. And I just want to say that when this pattern of behavior shows up in relationships, it's really about controlling all aspects of a person's life. It's usually connected to intense jealousy, trying to isolate a person from their family, friends, and community. It's about gaining control. It makes it very difficult for individuals that are experiencing coercive control to leave their partner. And oftentimes, again, not understood in a lot of our services when individuals are reaching out for help. And when coercive control is present in a relationship, it is more commonly results in death, lethality, and we use the word femicide in this work when we're talking about women and gender diverse individuals that are killed when their lives are taken by their partner or ex-partner or because of their gender, right? From men because of being female, for being a woman, for being a girl, for being a gender diverse individuals. Gender diverse individual. Go ahead there, Tyler. Okay. Timeline of the work, I just want to name, and again, there's so much work to be done here, but I just want to point on some important things. If you're not aware on this call, there's been a lot of work happening in Canada and Nova Scotia on the issue of gender-based violence. Before everything happened in 2020 in our province with the mass casualty events that started and deeply connected to intimate partner violence, we had in 2019, the final report of the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls was released. There was 231 individual calls to justice directed at government institutions, social service providers, and all Canadians. The work that has happened, those calls to justice, there has been very little implemented at this point, which is very disheartening. If people are not aware, the National Action Plan to End Gender-Based Violence, these are all reports that you can access online, and we can also send out as a follow-up to this if you're not aware. In 2023 in March, so we had the mass casualty events in Portapique that took place. There was a public inquiry that myself and I think some others on this call were participants in during that inquiry, and what formed the Turning the Tide Together, which contains 130 recommendations. In September of 2023, the province and the government of Canada established the Progress and Monitoring Committee. I sit in that one seat for the entire country for the gender-based violence sector. This is the first time in Canada's history that has a monitoring committee that was established post an inquiry or inquest. It again is, from a critical lens, why has there not been monitoring committees or implementation committees with other inquiries and inquests, including the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls? So I think, again, as social workers, we need to be asking these critical conversations around why certain things get attention and why other things are not. There's a lot of recommendations in all of these inquiries that have such important pieces of work that need to be done around systemic change in creating safer communities. And I'll just note too that in January of 2024, there was another report, an inquiry that took place in Nova Scotia here, and there's 25 recommendations meant to improve support for Canadian veterans and their families and healthcare services for African Nova Scotians to strengthen the application and licensing process for firearms. In 2024, our Nova Scotia government declared intimate partner violence as an epidemic. From a critical lens here too, that is not inclusive enough language. We have an epidemic of gender-based violence in our province. And this acknowledgement of intimate partner violence is very important. But I'll just note too that there's many survivors that have not experienced intimate partner violence, but have experienced a form of gender-based violence that this acknowledgement by our Nova Scotia government, they don't feel included in that acknowledgement. So it's a piece of advocacy work that remains part of the work that we're doing and trying to move this forward. And in June, Nova Scotia announced the Minister's Table on Gender-Based Violence, and that is just, I think, about to get started. And Tyler, I'm going to get you to go to the next slide. This here, the trauma responses, understanding the window of tolerance. If you're not aware of the window of tolerance and you're doing work with survivors, I will say that this has probably been one of the most helpful tools in me learning more about trauma. This is probably the most helpful tool that I hear from survivors and families about understanding their nervous system, understanding the responses, what is going on. It helps them because too often they're pathologized by the medical model. They're pathologized by family members, community members. When individuals see this diagram, and I have it with me, I'm not in my office today, I'm over at the college social work doing this, but I brought my flip chart with me. This sits in my office in my work in all of my work that I do with survivors and family. It really helps individuals understand what's going on. They're able to use this as a tool as well in better understanding what when their window of tolerance is widening, when it might be narrow. Who are the relationships, who are the people in their life that are creating situations where they're experiencing hyperarousal? So that's going out of their window, going up. Other times, hypoarousal happens when we're working with survivors, oftentimes there can be ebbing and flowing throughout their window of tolerance. Um, so important tool. It really is helpful. And I'm also encouraging people on this call um, to really look at your own trauma exposure and responses, right? We all have histories with, if it's through this work that we're doing, we're witnessing suffering and pain, we're exposed to what's happening in the world around us. We might have our own trauma histories. It's important that we have knowledge of our bodies, what is creating, what triggers happen for us that send us out of our window of tolerance, right? What are the things that we might need to do work on? When do we become, are we aware if we become defensive with a client or an individual we're working with? Are we aware when we're going into shutdown? Are we aware when we feel helpless or hopeless in this work, right? Understanding this window of tolerance is really important. And I just want to acknowledge anger and rage. And it's important that as we're doing this work, witnessing and hearing stories and seeing the world happening around us, anger and rage is, I just want to create space for anger and rage, right? But it's what we do with anger and rage. What do we need? What does anger and rage tell us, right? How do we have outlets for that? Are we aware when anger and rage might be taking over in ways that are not helpful? Are we aware of in our own bodies when we are becoming dysregulated in our work with our clients? And again, clients are so aware of us and the environment around them because that is how their nervous system has had to adapt. It's a trauma response. It's how they're living in survival. Go ahead there, Tyler. And the neurobiology of trauma. This again, and I'm just looking at the time here. Again, I'm going to go more into this in November, and always welcome if people have questions or ideas about this or want to better learn about this. There's so many resources. And one thing we need to be aware of, and I think one of the questions I've seen in the chat was about risk assessments and how we do that in our work. And I don't have this part of the presentation today. We're going to talk more about that in November. But one thing I want to say is that I was trained in my work coming up in doing shelter work with the Jacqueline Campbell danger assessment. And one thing that I continue to see as I build relationships with survivors is that things were shifting as they continue to build trust with us, right, as frontline service providers. Are you aware when the frontal lobe is online or offline in your work with survivors? So, for many survivors that are not feeling safe in their body, that are continuously being exposed to violence, their frontal lobe, their prefrontal cortex is impacted. And oftentimes it's offline at times. And when their emotional brain takes over, the back part here, it can take over, and a lot of different things might come up in the body. It is important when we're doing screening around risk assessments. It's important in our work with survivors that we have knowledge and awareness when the frontal lobe might be offline and offline. And if you're not aware of that, this is an invitation to get informed on that. This piece is missed, in my opinion. When I came up doing this work, this piece has been missed in the training for frontline service providers. And I think it's a key piece. And it doesn't matter which aspect of work you're doing, this awareness and knowledge is very helpful in working with survivors. Go ahead there, Tyler. And I just going to briefly mention here external environments. So for survivor or for ourselves, our external environment, so the people and the things around us, exteroception. Survivors of gender-based violence, in my experience in working with them, are very, very aware of everything happening around them. It is why oftentimes symptoms of chronic hyperarousal are happening, where they're very hyper focused, hypervigilance on what is taking place around them. Interoception, however, is inward, right? And when dissociation's happening or disconnection to the body, it is why it is very difficult for survivors of gender-based violence and intimate partner violence to turn inward. So one thing, and this is not just in the work of a therapist, right? But we tell people to take a deep breath, right? And that requires people to turn inward. And their bodies that they're living in, they might be, they're interacting with the world in their bodies. But for them to turn inward, to connect with emotions, to connect with their body and sensations in their body, to connect with their breath, this can be a very scary place for people. So also inviting you to think about if you're doing grounding work, if you're doing work with survivors, the body can be a very scary place. And grounding, mindfulness, turning inward can be a scary place for people. And if we don't have awareness of that and have the tools to work with individuals, we often see people being very triggered by these ways of working with folks. Go ahead there, Tyler. Victim blaming, pathologizing, and trauma responses. We live in a world that seeks to deny, invalidate, and silence experiences of trauma and gender-based violence. Oftentimes, survivors are internalizing many things about themselves from others. Okay. Um, Again, our medical system, our justice system, our policing services, our community-based services, our public and private systems, right, continue to pathologize survivors. And we might see on a very public level what takes place during trials. You know, one example recently, the Hockey Canada trial, right? For EM, highly pathologized, victim blame throughout that, including from the individuals with injustice that really failed to acknowledge trauma. And what do survivors internalize about themselves? And again, would love to talk more about this because when we look at treating trauma, we need to understand and acknowledge how these experiences with harms are internalized in the nervous system. It internalized it at a cognitive level, at an emotional level, and at a body level with sensations. Go ahead there, Tyler. Understanding betrayal, trauma, and wounds. Betrayals don't just take place for a lot of survivors of intimate partner violence and gender-based violence from the person that perpetrated the harm. Often the betrayals and the wounds are connected to family, friends, and community and their response or their reactions to them sharing details about their experiences with violence. Institutional betrayal is work I've done a ton of work on, but I just need a name here. Institutions that are in place to protect individuals. So our justice system, our policing systems, where people believe that if I go forward um, and I share, these systems are going to support and protect me. We see it very much so in even university settings, right? Go forward about their experiences around sexualized violence or other forms of violence, right? And failed by the institution because of protecting themselves, protecting the individual that caused harm. Secondary wounding, many folks that have experienced violence will say that secondary wounding is more harmful to them than the acts of harm from their partners or their ex-partners. Moral injuries are deep, deep wounds that we see um, survivors and even individuals working in this work experience when they're helping survivors with injustices that are happening within our current systems. And attachment trauma, I need to put this here. I hear a lot, even we'll say, around advocacy work, that if people have um, safe and affordable housing, individuals, women, gender diverse individuals will leave their partners. And for some individuals, that is true. What I have really learned, and this has come through my work as a therapist, is that there is many individuals that um, want to stay in their relationship for many reasons. And there is many other individuals that have attachment traumas because of earlier experiences with family violence, maybe attachment wounds, abandonment, um, different attachment traumas, that violence has been so normalized that they sometimes say that what they're experiencing now with their partner is so much better than what they experienced growing up. And that's why we need to bring this attachment based trauma lens to the work around intimate partner violence and gender-based violence. Go ahead there, Tyler. So, a critical lens to this work, I'll just say that too often, I've seen this throughout my whole career. I see it in so many different spaces, in government spaces, advocacy spaces, service providers saying we're trauma informed, we're survivor centered, we're violence informed, we're building trauma sensitive relationships. And I just need to highlight that um, we need to take a critical lens to what we're saying. What does this really mean? These are often buzzwords that many different sectors are using, service providers are using um, to share on a very public through policy and practice that they're trauma informed. I'm going to say that there is too many folks, survivors of different forms of violence, gender-based violence, intimate partner violence, but also other forms of harm that say the betrayal of thinking they're going to a trauma-informed service provider, a trauma-informed organization, and then their experience is not being trauma-informed. Go ahead there, Tyler. What does embodied gender-based violence practice mean? What does it mean to be trauma-informed, to build trauma-sensitive relationships? This is what I have come to know in my work with survivors and families. And I'm not going to have too much time to go into this, but I'm going to leave this with folks to think about. So decolonizing our practice. One thing I've continued to hear in this work, I don't call myself an expert of gender-based violence and intimate partner violence. I say I have been doing work with survivors and families over the past 17 years. I do specialized work around trauma, but I am not an expert. I think that if we're going to decolonizing our work and share power, we need to be very careful with these power dynamics at play and trying to intentionally dismantle power at every opportunity. Survivors as the expert. When we approach the work, we share this with the individuals we're working with, that dismantles, right? And that's an opportunity of sharing power, co-creating space and practices. And we're going to really intentionally move into this in November. But what does that mean? Co-creating space and practices to me mean giving people choice, honoring choices, giving people as soon as they come in, right? Giving them opportunities, choices about where they sit. This is not the therapist seat. This is not the seat where the professional sits. It's giving people choices, honoring their nervous system, making choices that serve their bodies and their experiences where they can feel comfortable. We need to acknowledge that not every survivor wants to leave. Not every survivor is gonna follow the what many organizations expect them to follow. And we need to, from a critical lens, look at non-attachment to outcomes. And what does that mean, right? Non-attachment to outcomes are so important when we look at when we hold beliefs that a person should not be with their partner or not returning to their partner. Non-attachment to outcomes look like not if someone has followed through with a 6 week CBT group, right? Or they have not followed through with attending sessions regularly, right? Non-attachment to outcomes is us really just respecting and acknowledging where people are at, and that us not putting parameters around people are not meeting the thresholds of moving forward, getting better, being fixed. We hear these words, right? They're not meeting the outcomes that are being established by maybe criteria within services, within funding agreements, non-coercion. We have a lot of work to do across all of our work around non-coercion. Today, I used invitational language. Over the past few years, I've been introduced to invitational language. It's a game changer in the work we're doing with survivors. So more information to come around that, but inviting people into their bodies, inviting people to make choices. Too often, again, consent. Do we get consent before we send a letter off to an insurance company? Do we co-create letters, advocacy letters? If you're doing any sort of referrals or progress reports, are you co-creating those reports with survivors? Are you sharing with them what you're sending? In many survivors' experiences, and what they share with me is that they have no idea what their treatment provider or service provider is sharing about them. And in our work, we have a lot of unlearning to do in an ongoing way, inviting feedback and integrating it into practice. Go ahead there, Tyler. The core experiences of psychological trauma are disempowerment and disconnection from others. Recovery, therefore, is based upon the empowerment of the survivor and the creation of new connections. This is again a quote by Judith Herman. Judith Herman, the importance of trauma-sensitive relationships, our bodies coming into the space, is so important. Are we going to be a safe enough body to hold the work that the person might need to do? Are we in a position, right, to be in a healthy enough relationship with ourselves to do this work? Go ahead there, Tyler. So as we close an embodied reflection, if you're curious, you're invited to reflect on the questions below regarding the possibility of supporting a survivor or survivors of gender-based violence. What does it look like to get attached to an outcome or outcomes for a survivor or survivors? And why might your attachment or attachments to an outcome cause harm to survivors? And you can go ahead there, Tyler. So just again, reflecting, taking that away, and maybe looking at policy and practice within your organizations and your work, and seeing if anything is coming up for you from this conversation. And just always an invitation. There's so much work to be done. Embodied gender-based violence activism is so important. The collective work that is needed for the cultural shift that is needed around gender-based violence is so important for survivors. And I just want to say that for many survivors, advocacy and activism is a part of their therapeutic journey. It's part of their healing journey, and we need to create space for that in our work with survivors. So thank you so much. And there is a few book recommendations at the end of the PowerPoint, so please take a look at them. And again, any questions, please reach out. And yeah, thank you for joining and for being curious as we co-create space and learning together.
Thanks, Christina. I was reflecting on a lot on what you were discussing about, well, just all the things we were discussing about how pervasive domination is in our society through counseling, therapeutic practices, through relationships, through societies and systems and structures, and how as clinicians or social workers or helpers in general, we have an opportunity every single day in our relationships to resist and repair that lens of domination that is so pervasive. So thanks for sharing so much. I also just want to name that Christine and I have been working together on this now, I think since like April, and leading towards this in-person conference. And every time I work with Christina, I come away with a new nugget or a new learning. And she has very lovingly challenged me on some things. And invitational language is something that I'm taking away from this session and from our relationship and the work we've done together that I'm very grateful for. A few other things I want to share with folks. More books here as well. You have access to this presentation. It will also be sent out in the follow-up email. I'm also including those reports that Christina had mentioned. So the DFI report, Mass Casualty Missions, Turning the Tide Together, and the National Action Plan around gender-based violence. So those will be in the follow-up email. Want to encourage you folks to fill out our evaluation survey form. You can use this QR code, you can get the link from the presentation, or you can wait for the email that's going to come later and I'll have the link as well. The feedback will be shared with Christina as well, so really value your feedback on the session, but also, just PD programs in general. And finally, want to remind everyone, especially for social workers on the call, it is renewal season, which is bananas. I don't know how we're here, but up until January 31st, you have the opportunity to complete your renewals, including your tracking and submissions of your PD activities. You can also follow all of our activities through our Eventbrite, our LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, and our website, of course. And then these are some of the upcoming activities. Want to point folks to the November 24th session. It is currently sold out, but we do have a wait list. So if you're curious and interested about coming to this session in person here in the city, it's going to be at the Mi'kmaq Native Friendship Center on November 24th. Please sign up for the wait list. We might have a little bit more capacity to add people. But if you're not in the city or you can't come on this day, or you're just on the wait list and you can't come to the session at all, Christine and I are going to be working to translate some of that content to an online format for the new year. So you're not going to miss out. You'll miss out maybe on the in-person session, but we will have some of this content added to our online sessions. A reminder, the session's also recorded, so this will be available on YouTube, hopefully within the next couple of weeks. Yeah, otherwise, I hope you have things to look forward to, and that whether you're going back from your lunch break or you're jumping into more emails like I have to do, I hope you have things to look forward to this week and this weekend, and you're taking care of yourself and do whatever you can to just sort of navigate the complexity of the now. Thank you again, and with that, we'll end the call and take care.